In 2008, with the 4th overall pick, the Seattle Supersonics selected Russell Westbrook, the 6'3" point guard coming out of UCLA, who was known for his athletic explosion and his defensive prowess. He would then go on to average 15 points, 5 assists, and 5 rebounds, shooting 40% from the field and also 82% from the free throw line, and was awarded to the All-Rookie First Team. He consistently got better year in and year out, and by year 3 he was already an All-NBA performer, putting up averages of 22 points a game as well as 8 assists and 5 rebounds, just short of 2 steals, shooting 44% from the field and 84% from the free throw line. He would continue to shine year in and year out and play at an elite level, as he was awarded with numerous All-Star selections and All-NBA teams, and by 2017 he was already awarded the league MVP and became the 2nd player in NBA history and the 1st player in over 40 years to average a triple-double. He would go on to do this for 2 more consecutive seasons and would establish himself as one of the greatest point guards that the league has ever seen. But despite the great career that Russell Westbrook has had and the amount of success that he has seen year in and year out, there are numerous critics towards his game and his legacy. And in today's video, we're going to discuss all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But without further ado, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Do not forget to hit that bell to be notified after each and every single video that I post. Follow me on Twitter, all the social media links are down below. And without further ado, let's talk about the legacy of Russell Westbrook. When you think of all of the great point guards over the past 10 to 15 years, it doesn't take long before Russell Westbrook's name is brought up. I mean, when you think about Steph Curry, Chris Paul, Damian Lillard, it just wouldn't sound right if you don't throw Russell Westbrook's name in that mix. Not only is he one of the most athletic players that I have ever seen in any sport, but when he was at his peak, he was the most athletic point guard that the game of basketball has ever seen. And honestly, yeah, that may be surpassed one day, but when we saw Russell Westbrook come into the NBA, even from his rookie season, you could see the explosion in his game night in and night out, and the things that he would do, whether on fast breaks or just simply in the half-court setting off of backdoor cuts. This guy would terrorize defenses in the paint with his uber explosion. But when I watch him today, there are so many people that have changed their opinions on Russell Westbrook, and as you guys know, I have been very critical about him and his career ever since the beginning of my channel. But when I watch Russell Westbrook, trust me, I do not hate him. I just see somebody that could be 10 times better, and it's only because of his own wrongdoings and failures that he is not looked at in a more positive light in terms of his all-time greatness, because he has all the tools, all of the God-given ability, even after all the knee surgeries and injuries that he's had, to be a very effective player at an elite level. He is easily one of the most gifted players that I have ever seen. As a passer, he was one of the best of his time period, and as a scorer, even though he can be inefficient, when he is hot, there aren't many players in NBA history that are as unstoppable as he is. And the list of accolades that he has to his name, no doubt not only makes him a Hall of Famer and a top 50 player in NBA history, but it makes him among the 10 best point guards to ever play the game of basketball. Not only is he a league MVP, but he has multiple All-NBA selections, and 2 of them being on the first team, and he was a perennial All-Star for the majority of his career. But how can I forget and not talk about the infamous 2017 MVP season? Now, put aside your differences for Russell Westbrook, you cannot ever take away the fact that he is a former league MVP. Whether you disagree with the selection or not, or you thought James Harden should have won, it should not negate the fact that Russell Westbrook had one of the greatest seasons in NBA history, leading an Oklahoma City roster, which at the time was looked at as a team that was going through a transitional phase and had a little to no spacing whatsoever. He averaged 32 points, 10 assists and 11 rebounds, just short of 2 steals, shooting 42 to 43% from the field, 34% from behind the arc on over 7 attempts a game, and also shooting 84 to 85% from the free throw line. Those are incredible numbers, and say what you want, he made the best of his situation and had one of the most phenomenal and iconic seasons in the history of the game of basketball. He did something that we had not seen in over 40 years. It is something that many people who saw it in the 60s thought that they would never see it again, and he did it not once, not twice, but 3 times consecutively. That is something that nobody ever will be able to take away from Russell Westbrook. So as far as his NBA career is concerned, he has had one of the better careers in recent memory, and it should be treated as such. But I cannot talk about all of the positive and not present all of the negative, because as great as a career that he has had, failure and disappointment are still major factors that we need to discuss. Because Russell Westbrook, as great as he is in the regular season, it doesn't always translate to the postseason, because time after time consistently in his career, he failed to come up big in the moments that his team needed him the most. I think the first time that this really became a noticeable problem was the 2014 Western Conference Finals against the San Antonio Spurs. Because with his partner in crime in Kevin Durant, who actually played relatively solid in that series, Russell Westbrook would shoot below 41% from the field, 28% from behind the arc on well over 5 attempts a game, and also averaged 4 turnovers throughout the entirety of that series. And to make matters worse, in the closeout game, he would go 8 of 24 from the field, shooting 16% from behind the arc, along with 7 turnovers. And in a game that was decided by 5 points, I would say his inefficiencies and carelessness with the ball were a huge deciding factor, if not the biggest deciding factor, in the loss of the Oklahoma City Thunder to the San Antonio Spurs. But we fast forward 2 years later, in 2016, where Kevin Durant's free agency decision in the upcoming offseason was the talk of the season, and it was basically championship or bust for the Oklahoma City Thunder. After all the years of missed opportunities, whether it was due to bad performances from either Kevin Durant or Russell Westbrook, or you could look at injuries that cost them multiple seasons, or just bad management decisions, primarily trading James Harden because they didn't want to pay him $4 million, they were up 3-1 against the reigning defending champions who went 73-9, the Golden State Warriors. And in the last 3 games, inefficiencies from Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant really cost them that series. But staying on the topic of Russell Westbrook, in the last 3 games, he shot below 37% from the field, 26% from behind the arc, as well as 5 turnovers. They would go on to lose all of those games, obviously, and that was the end of Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook's duo as we knew it. But then we move on to 2017, and in 2017, I cannot just read off the numbers in the series because I have to go to what happened leading up to it. Because in the 2017 season, Russell Westbrook would average another triple-double, but the only difference between the win total would be 1 game from the previous year. And in an offseason where they added Paul George and Carmelo Anthony via trade, you would think that with all 3 of those players on the roster and the expectation to be the #1 threat to the Golden State Warriors, that they would be a top 3 seed. But that didn't happen, as all 3 players struggled to find consistency throughout the duration of the season. But many people gave them a pass and said that they would ramp it up come playoff time. But in the first round, matched up against the Utah Jazz, who many people didn't even think would make the playoffs in the beginning of the season after the departure of Gordon Hayward, the Oklahoma City Thunder would lose in 6 games in very embarrassing fashion, as the underperformances of Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, and Russell Westbrook would be the main catalyst for just how disappointing this alleged quote-unquote super team was, and all the hype they had coming into the season all being thrown away for nothing because they couldn't step up to the plate. And as the leader of that team, it just once and again showed people everywhere that maybe Russell Westbrook cannot be the #1 option or your franchise player if you want to win a championship. But the next season, they traded away Carmelo Anthony, picked up Dennis Schroeder as the backup point guard. They finally decided to let Paul George be the #1 option on that team, as he should have, because he's the better offensive player, and he would prove that by not only being on the first team All-NBA, but finishing top 3 in MVP voting and top 3 as well in Defensive Player of the Year. So as a team, this was a really sound roster, and their record would have reflected that had Paul George not suffered a shoulder injury that caused him to be in and out of games towards the end of the season. But that would kind of be a blessing in disguise at the time, as they ran into the Portland Trail Blazers, who were the 3 seed as they were the 6th, because the Portland Trail Blazers had lost their starting center in Jusuf Nurkic and had to start Enes Kanter. And for those who don't know, Enes Kanter is one of the worst defenders that the game has and will ever see. And considering that Nurkic was arguably their second best player, if not their third without question, that was a huge loss for the Portland Trail Blazers, and they were at a huge disadvantage. So one would think having Russell Westbrook, the former league MVP, and Paul George on the roster as well, who finished top 3 in MVP voting as well as Defensive Player of the Year, that they would be able to win that series. But that didn't happen, as they lost in an embarrassing 5 games, as Damian Lillard would torch them for 50 points in the closeout game and hit one of the greatest shots in NBA history, which became the 3rd straight year of Russell Westbrook's career since the departure of Kevin Durant to Golden State in the summer of 2016 that he failed to get out of the first round. The first year, the excuse was that he did not have enough help around him and that team was going through a transitional phase. In the second year, the excuse was that Carmelo Anthony was the problem. He was such a black hole on defense and offensively was not productive enough and needed to go to the bench, which he refused. But by year 3, there really was no more excuses that people could give for Russell Westbrook, because year in and year out, the only thing that was constant was Russell Westbrook's failures in the postseason due to his own inefficiencies and his terrible basketball decision making. And after the 2019 playoffs, the Oklahoma City Thunder decided to push the reset button and traded Russell Westbrook to the Houston Rockets for a boatload of draft picks and Chris Paul. But here we are in 2020, and the expectations are the same. Win a championship or bust. And yes, he may not be favored with the Houston Rockets over teams like the Lakers and the Clippers, but at this point in his career, we cannot give him that kind of benefit of the doubt. You've had opportunities and played with great players year in and year out. There are no more excuses left to give. But in conclusion, when I look back at Russell Westbrook's career, this is a guy that could retire right now, and I would have no problem with him being a first ballot Hall of Famer, recognized as a top 50 player in NBA history, and a top 10 point guard to ever play the game of basketball. But at the end of the day, I gotta call it how I see it. He is one of the bigger underachievers in NBA history, because too many times in his career was he put in very favorable situations and he blew opportunity after opportunity to go further in the playoffs, but by his own wrongdoings and inefficiencies, he failed to do so. And I gotta dock points against him for that. He was a great player without question, but he could have and should have been greater than he actually was, and that's on him. With all that being said, let me know your opinions down below in the comment section. Hit that subscribe button and that bell to turn on post notifications. Make sure you check out the links in the description box. And without further ado, y'all have a blessed day. I'm out. Peace.